So we got our reducer function no matter how it was created, and we're providing it to the application in the end by setting up this store. Now, before diving into actions and making sure that the reducer does a bit more than just defining some initial state, I want to show you how you can read that data that's managed by this reducer in the end from this store. And therefore here, in this application, where I have the counter output component, for example, I want to go to that component, and in that component, I want to output the currently stored counter in the template of this component. To do that here in the counter output component, I will get rid of this counter service that I'm injecting, and I can therefore also get rid of ng on destroy and ng on init here. And instead, we can now inject the store. And that will be of type store, and this then should be imported from @ngrx store. Now this store, which I'm injecting here, will be this one globally managed store. So this store thing, this store object that's managed by ngrx, and we can inject this store because we are providing it here. And it's the same if you're using standalone components. There, the store is also being created and provided, in this case in the main.ts file, and therefore there as well. In the counter output component, you could get rid of ng on init and ng on destroy and get rid of this counter service and instead simply inject the store, which is imported from @ngrx store. And therefore, of course, you can also get rid of this counter service import, no matter if you're using standalone components or Angular modules. But that's of course not all that should be done here. Instead, what's typically done next is that you get rid of these properties which I used before for getting my counter. And instead, I'll add one new property to my class here, to my counter output component class, and I'll name it count $sign at the end. Now, the $sign is technically not important, but it is a convention you will see in some Angular projects, that you decorate properties with a $sign at the end if those properties in the end store an observable. And indeed, that's what I'll do here. I will store an observable in here. And again, it would absolutely work without that $sign, but since you'll see this in some Angular projects, I will add the $sign here. Now, observable is being imported from RxJS. The subscription import is not needed anymore though. And this observable will in the end yield a number because my counter will in the end be a number. So we can add this extra annotation here to make that clear. Now, where do we set this observable though? Well, we can do this in the constructor. There we can assign a value to the count observable, and the value I want to assign is store, so using this injected store argument here, dot, and then select, because that's how you can read data from the store. This select method, which is provided on this injected store object, and keep in mind that this store object is coming from ngrx. So this select method, which you can call on the store object, allows you to select data from the store. And to select, you can then pass your key that identifies the data you want to select. And that's the key you used for storing your reducer. So here in this case, in this store, I pass this object, this map of reducers to for root, and that will then behind the scenes construct a store that combines all the data from all these reducers. And these different pieces of data that are coming from these different reducers will be stored in that one global store object by using those keys. So these keys which you used here for assigning the reducer can be used for extracting the data from that store. So the data that's managed by this reducer. So in my case here, I want to select counter here. I want to select counter from my store because I used the counter key here. And again, it does not matter whether you're using standalone components or not. Now here I'm getting some TypeScript error because here in this component, TypeScript doesn't understand that my store will have this counter key. Now I know it as a developer because I set it up, but TypeScript doesn't know it in this file here. Therefore, what's recommended is that you add some generic type annotation to this store type here, and you there define the shape of your store. In this case here, counter number. So here I'm telling TypeScript that my store will in the end be an object that will have a counter key, because I used counter as a key here for assigning the reducer, and that the value that will be stored in my store under that key will be a number. And it will be a number because here in this app, my counter reducer will in the end return a number. It will always return a number because my counter state here is a number. So therefore I'm adding this type annotation, and with that I can successfully select my counter. Now when selecting values from the store, you're not getting the values themselves though. Instead, what you are getting is an observable. Select yields an observable. That's why I'm storing an observable here in count. And the advantage of this is that it will automatically be updated whenever the data in the store changes. So if the data changes there, this component can listen to that change and can update the UI. Now we could do this manually now by simply calling subscribe and managing some property in this component, and then unsubscribe in ng on destroy and so on. That would all be fine. But we can also leverage a special pipe that's provided by Angular, the async pipe. Here in the counter output component template file, I can use my count $sign variable, which as you learned contains an observable, and use the built-in async pipe on it to set up an automatic listener to this observable that will update this part of the UI whenever the observable changes. So that's a convenient feature built into Angular. And we'll ignore this part down here for the moment. I'll just get rid of this and we'll fix it later. But that's how we can listen to an observable in the template and unwrap the latest value and update this part whenever the value changes, and how we can select data from the store. Now I can also get rid of the onInit and onDestroy interfaces and of these imports. And I'll now copy over that code to my counter output component that uses standalone components. I'll also get rid of those interfaces here. I will import observable from RxJS, and with that we're selecting data in this component as well. And then there we also want to use the async pipe like this and get rid of this. Since it's a standalone component here though, we also must make sure that the async pipe is available by adding imports to the counter output component there, and by then importing the async pipe from @AngularCommon. Add this import and add it to the imports array here. With that, however, you will be able to read and output data from a store, no matter if you're using standalone components or modules. And therefore, to see this in action, I will actually run ng-serve here to start up my development server and preview this application. And with that up and running, if I go to localhost 4200, I can see my counter there. Now these buttons don't work yet, we'll work on this soon, but I can see my counter. I also got no errors in the DevTools. And of course, this will also be the case if I do this here for my standalone component application. If I run ng-serve there and I reload this page, that still works and I still get no errors.